What if I told you that the most European DNA in Africa wasn't found in Cairo or Casablanca, but here, buried beneath the sun-cracked dunes of the Sahara, not along the Mediterranean coast, not among the ancient cities touched by Rome or Phoenicia, but deep in the desert, in the heart of Libya, among a nomadic people known for silence, secrecy and survival, the Tuareg. They're called Kel Tamashek, the free people, wrapped in indigo veils that stain their skin blue. They've guarded the desert trade routes for centuries, caravans of salt, gold and memory. They speak an ancient Berber language, carry curved swords called takuba, and follow matrilineal traditions in a land ruled by men. For generations their origins were a riddle. Were they the last Berbers untouched by empires, or something even older? Then came the year 2009. A study published in the Annals of Human Genetics shook the scientific world. Researchers extracted mitochondrial DNA from 129 Tuareg women in Libya's Fezzan region, far from the coast, isolated in the desert. What they found should not have been there. 61% of those women, more than half, carried a maternal lineage called haplogroup H1. Not African, not Near Eastern, European. H1 is one of the dominant maternal DNA markers found in Spain, Portugal and the Basque Country. It originated in the Iberian Peninsula and spread out during a moment in time when glaciers receded, around 15,000 years ago, at the end of the last glacial maximum. But here's the part that made scientists go silent. The frequency of H1 in these Tuareg women wasn't just high for Africa. It was higher than in most of Europe today. How? Why? Who brought these genes across oceans of sand into a region untouched by farming civilizations or Mediterranean empires? It wasn't from colonization. It wasn't from trade. This genetic thread was prehistoric, passed down from mothers to daughters across millennia through windstorms, wars and migrations long forgotten. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a fingerprint, pressed into the DNA of a person who shouldn't carry it. But this was only half the story, because while the mothers whispered of Europe, the fathers told a story no one expected. But what if neither story is what we thought? What if I told you? This wasn't just a genetic twist, it was a civilizational outlier. A people so isolated, they dodged not one, but two major migrations that shaped the rest of North Africa. While empires rose and fell, while entire regions converted language, faith, even memory. The Tuareg remained unchanged, not static, but defiant. They kept their tongue. Tamashek, they kept their script. Tifinagh, one of the oldest writing systems still in use. They honoured matrilineal descent, even in a world ruled by patriarchy, and they carried their identity like armour, across millennia of dust and war. Ancient historians, like Herodotus in the 5th century BC, spoke of the Garamantes, a desert empire that ruled Fezzan in modern-day Libya, their cities carved into rock, their chariots cutting across sand. Many believe the Tuareg are their descendants, and that's where the story turns colder. Because while surrounding populations from Morocco to Egypt show clear traces of the Neolithic expansion, the Tuareg genome holds a haunting silence. No mtDNA haplogroup J, no T, not even a whisper of U6, which is common in Berbers across coastal North Africa. In Libyan Tuareg, 0%. This isn't just a quirk, this is a genetic rebellion. While the rest of North Africa was reshaped by the Neolithic wave 7,000 years ago, carrying agriculture, Semitic language and Near Eastern bloodlines, the Tuareg were already in the desert, already settled, already separate. They didn't absorb the waves, they missed it entirely. What we're looking at is a genome frozen in time, one that didn't just resist outside influence, it never received it. But then something strange happened, an excavation in the same Fezzan region once ruled by the Garamantes unearthed a burial site. Inside it was a woman. Her bones were old, her ornaments are familiar, but her DNA whispered a different truth. But that truth didn't drift in from the Nile or the Fertile Crescent. It crashed in from Spain. That's right. That ancient grave in the Libyan Fezzan, once thought to contain a local matriarch of desert descent, held something shocking: haplogroup H3 and haplogroup V, two maternal DNA signatures tied not to Africa but to post-Ice Age hunter-gatherers from the Iberian Peninsula, regions we now call Spain and Portugal. Let that sink in. This wasn't just H1, the maternal marker found earlier. This was a triad of Iberian haplogroups, H1, H3 and V, showing up deep in the Sahara. And all three trace back to a European refuge population that survived the cold grip of the Ice Age, only to migrate south when the ice finally released its hold, around 15,000 years ago, at the end of the last glacial maximum. But here's what struck scientists harder than anything. There was no sign of haplogroup U6, a core Berber maternal lineage. None of the J or T haplogroups either, the maternal signatures of Neolithic farmers from the Near East who swept into Africa and Europe around 7,000 years ago. This was not a case of Mediterranean mixing. This was not North Africa absorbing European migrants. This was something older, something prehistoric, a bloodline from Paleolithic Europe, not diluted, not faint, but dominant. Tuareg women in Libya carried these ancient maternal markers in frequencies higher than modern European populations. According to the 2009 study in the Annals of Human Genetics, the presence of haplogroup Phi, with its rare 16,234 mutation, suggested a single female ancestor who passed her genome down, untouched, for thousands of years. Emotionally, this flips everything we assumed. These weren't desert nomads of African origin. They were the granddaughters of Ice Age survivors, carrying European mitochondrial DNA across oceans of time and sand. But if the maternal line came from Iberia, then who were the fathers? Because when researchers turned to the Y-DNA, the story jumped continents again, and this time it pointed east. If the Tuareg mothers carried echoes of Ice Age Europe, then the fathers, the ones who passed on names, legacies and lineage, came from another origin entirely. Through the lens of Y chromosome analysis, a new truth emerged. Most Tuareg men, especially those in Libya and Algeria, carry haplogroup E1b1b1b, also known as E-M81. Nicknamed the Berber marker, this Y-DNA haplogroup is one of the strongest signatures of indigenous North African males. But here's where it gets interesting. The ancestral form of this lineage likely originated in the Near East, not North Africa. It probably diffused across the Mediterranean corridor during the Neolithic period, somewhere between 9,800 and 2,800 years ago, carried by early farmers, shepherds, and nomads chasing new lands as the Sahara dried up. But then came the bigger shock. The Tuareg have no trace, zero, of haplogroup J, the hallmark of Arab and Levantine paternal lines. This is the same Y-DNA that surged into North Africa during the Islamic expansions and is now found in Egyptians, Moroccans, even Berbers throughout the Maghreb. But in the Tuareg, nothing. as if that wave simply washed around them. This wasn't just isolation, this was a genetic firewall, built by geography, language and culture. So what do we have? European maternal DNA preserved from the last ice age. Near Eastern paternal DNA dating back to the Neolithic. But no signs of Arab or Islamic gene flow despite centuries of contact. It paints a picture of sex-biased migration, where migrating fathers, likely from the Eastern Mediterranean, met and merged with desert-born mothers of ancient European origin. But this merging wasn't universal. It was selective. It was precise. And it was old. Because when researchers travelled further south, into the heart of Niger, they uncovered a Y chromosome that didn't come from Europe, Africa or the Near East. It came from somewhere no one expected, and it rewrote the map of North African ancestry. That somewhere was Niger, and what they found there, beneath layers of dust, under centuries of forgotten tribal names, wasn't just a surprise. It was a mutation that shattered borders. In the Tuareg community of Tanout, Niger, nearly 33.3% of men carried a paternal lineage known as haplogroup R1b, but not the typical R1b you'd expect in Western Europeans, the one linked to Celtic warriors or Anglo-Saxon migrations. This was a special, rare and older branch, R1, B-E588, and here's where it gets wild. R1B-EI88 is practically extinct in Europe today, but in Chadic-speaking populations around Lake Chad, across northern Cameroon and deep into Central Africa, it thrives. Scientists believe this Y-DNA lineage likely originated in the Levant, sometime during the Holocene wet phase, a time when the Sahara wasn't desert but green savanna, dotted with lakes, trees and migrating cattle. Between 7,000 and 5,000 years ago, these early pastoralists crossed into Africa, chasing rain, grazing lands and survival. And as they did, they brought with them something unexpected, a paternal code that would later echo inside Tuareg DNA. But why is it there? Because the Tuareg weren't just isolated desert nomads. They were part of a much older world, a network of forgotten kingdoms that stretched beyond language and skin into migrations no textbook ever taught. R1b-588 ties the Tuareg not just to North Africa, not just to the Levant, but to Central African Proto-Chadic peoples long before the rise of recorded empires. We're not talking about Berbers anymore. We're talking about ancient connectors, people whose bloodlines skip across geography like broken mirrors reflecting an older world. And this revelation rips open an entirely new question. Because just as this lineage rooted itself in the Green Sahara, geneticists discovered another signal, but this one wasn't from Europe, or the Levant, or even known African ancestry. It was a ghost, not a myth, not a metaphor, a literal ghost in the genome. And this ghost had a name, a face, and bones, buried in a place we forgot was ever alive. In January 2025, the journal Nature published a revelation that stunned the scientific world. A male skeleton uncovered in the remote sands of Tassili Naja, southeastern Algeria, was dated to roughly 7,000 years ago. But the real shock wasn't his age, it was his DNA. When researchers sequenced his genome, they found something no one expected. A genetic lineage so old, so isolated, it hadn't been touched for nearly 40,000 years. Not by Europe, not by Asia, not even by the rest of Africa. It was a human branch that vanished everywhere else. Yet here, it survived. Alone, unmixed, unseen for 4 ice ages. He wasn't Tuareg, but what his genome revealed was far more terrifying. That the Sahara, long dismissed as a natural barrier, was once a genetic crypt. A green Sahara between 8,000 and 5,000 BCE, covered in rivers and savannas, had become the perfect trap. It didn't just protect life, it trapped bloodlines, preserved them like fossilized memories. And now those bloodlines are showing up again. In Tuareg DNA, researchers found echoes of that ancient ghost. Not direct matches, but haunting similarities. Unusual haplotypes, restricted diversity, ancient founder effects that mirror only one other sample ever discovered. Him. The Tuareg genome isn't just rare, it's fossilized. It behaves like something that missed every major migration and refused to blend. What if the Tuareg aren't just nomads? What if they are the living descendants of a human group that split off before agriculture, before language spread, even before modern Africans and Europeans became distinct? One maternal lineage in particular carried a mutation never seen before. Not in any modern population, not in Ice Age remains, not even in the oldest Neolithic genomes. It shouldn't exist, but it does. And it's only been found in one place, one woman, one grave, one mutation, that now has scientists chasing a forgotten mother of civilizations. But what if that mother wasn't forgotten at all? What if she's still here, not in a tomb or a scroll, but in the bodies of thousands of Tuareg women walking the dunes today? In the samples of Tuareg carrying mtDNA haplogroup V, scientists noticed something strange. A single mutation, a shift at position 16,234 on the mitochondrial genome, showing up again and again. Different women, different clans, same anomaly. This wasn't random. This wasn't a drift. This was a signature. The unmistakable echo of a founder, one woman, living somewhere around 3,600 years ago, maybe near the end of the Bronze Age. She survived. Her daughters survived. And over centuries of nomadic movement and desert warfare, her bloodline exploded. That's what a founder event looks like in the genome. Not a trend, not a myth, a real woman, buried by time, but not erased. And here's where science meets soul. Tuareg culture has always been matrilineal, in ways outsiders never fully understood. Property isn't passed through fathers. It's the mothers who own the tents, the mothers who name the clans. Even the poetry, the ancient songs sung under the stars, comes from the mouths of women. This isn't just genetics echoing culture, it's culture mirroring something even older, an instinct that through the chaos of empire and migration, the only truth that never changed was her, the mother, the matriarch, the quiet voice that still whispers from behind the blue veil. But the desert doesn't only remember voices that chose to stay, because not every woman who shaped this DNA story came by choice. Some were forced into it, taken, traded, vanished, but never forgotten. She may not have worn the blue veil by choice. She may not have spoken the Tuareg tongue, but her children would, and her DNA would outlive kingdoms. Because across the burning spine of the Sahara there's another legacy buried under the sand, a legacy of chains, of caravans, of names erased, and blood remembered. In the genetic profiles of Tuareg women in Libya, nearly 35% belong to haplogroup L, the mitochondrial signature of sub-Saharan Africa. But this isn't modern migration. This is ancient trauma coded in flesh. A maternal inheritance tied to haplogroups L2 and L0, lineages passed down from enslaved women, brought north over generations of trans-Saharan slave trading. This wasn't incidental, it was systemic. The Garamantes, the desert kings of Fezzan, were moving human cargo as early as the 1st century BCE. They carved roads through rock. They built subterranean irrigation to feed their cities. And they captured lives to sustain their rise. But it didn't end there. When the Tuareg confederacies emerged during the medieval period, they inherited the same trade routes and the same silence. These women weren't counted, weren't recorded, but their mitochondria, the maternal genome, never forgets. In Tuareg populations from Niger, Mali and Chad, the numbers are even higher. Some groups show sub-Saharan maternal DNA in over 80% of sampled individuals. And yet, these aren't just statistics. They're the silent grandmothers of today's Tuareg. Their lullabies were lost, their languages are buried, but their biology, permanent. Through their daughters, they became the Tuareg. Not just absorbed, entwined, and just when we begin to feel we're piecing this dual identity together, north and south, Berber and black, ancient and enslaved, one of the deepest roots in Tuareg genetics suddenly disappears. And what vanished tells us more than anything we've found. In genetic research, absence can be louder than presence. And when scientists analysed the full mitochondrial and Y-DNA profiles of the Tuareg, they didn't just find surprises, they found voids. Haplogroups J and T, maternal lineages that define most of North Africa, the Levant and Neolithic Europe, were completely missing. Even J1, the paternal marker carried by waves of Arab male ancestry, was gone. Nothing. Not a trace. And then came the biggest shock. No U6. The lineage considered the genetic fingerprint of the Berbers. So ancient it traces back over 35,000 years, showing up in Moroccan skeletons, Iberian mummies, and Amazigh highlanders, from Algeria to the Canary Islands. But in the Tuareg, silence. They don't have it. That silence isn't empty. It's defiant. Because U6, J, T, all those lineages rode in with history's great turning points. The Neolithic Revolution, when farmers from the Near East reshaped diets, settlements, and genetics. The Islamic expansions, when Arab tribes swept westward, reshaping identities and bloodlines across the Maghreb. But the Tuareg genome stood still. They didn't just avoid absorption, they avoided time. Their DNA looks pre-Neolithic, pre-Islamic, pre-Berber. That's not cultural resistance, that's genetic insulation, a barrier so ancient it seems like the Tuareg walked out of the Upper Paleolithic and just kept walking. These weren't just desert nomads adapting to sandstorms and trade routes. They were a genetic time capsule moving across the Sahara while the rest of the world was rewriting its blood. But this raises a far darker, deeper question. If they don't carry Neolithic lineages, if they don't carry Arab ones, if they don't even carry ancient Berber markers, then who were they before the Berbers ever existed? To answer that, you can't look at just the maternal lines, or the paternal ones. You have to look at the whole genome, the entire autosomal tapestry, the raw genetic fingerprint of identity. And when scientists did, the result wasn't clarity, it was chaos. Tuareg DNA didn't point in one direction, it spun in circles. There were threads of Maghrebi Berber, yes, echoing the ancient Tafarolt remains from 15,000 years ago in modern-day Morocco. There were pieces of sub-Saharan African ancestry tied to migrations long before recorded history. There were hints of Iberian European blood from those post-glacial hunter-gatherers who may have walked south when the ice retreated. And there were faint signals of East African and Levantine influence, whispering of the Green Sahara and the ancient cattle herders who once danced with the rain. But here's the twist. Unlike neighbouring populations, The Tuareg had less early European farmer DNA, less of that Neolithic wave that washed over Africa, the Near East and Europe between 9,000 and 5,000 years ago. Instead, they carried more of the older layers, the Paleolithic core, the sub-Saharan depth, the ancestral mix that predates farming, empires, even writing itself. They don't look like a modern population that blended. They look like an ancient population that survived, a people who walked through the flood of migrations and came out still holding their original shape. But even with all this, something didn't fit. There was a signal, a thread that didn't belong. It showed up faintly, almost like static. No clear geographic anchor, no known ancient population. It didn't match Europe. It didn't match Africa. And yet, it was there, quiet, repeating. The final mystery in the Tuareg genome, one no one has unravelled. And maybe it can't be unravelled, because the thread we're pulling doesn't lead to any known people. It leads to someone who vanished before history ever began. When geneticists filtered through Tuareg genomes, they stumbled across haplotypes, subtle patterns, mutations, that didn't match any documented populations in Africa. Not Bantu, not Nilotic, not Berber, not even the ghostly remains of Tafaralt. Some of these mitochondrial signatures had no match in any known database. Others were variants of known types, but altered in ways that shouldn't exist unless they came from an older, unsampled ancestor. A people who left no ruins, no pottery, no oral tales, just genetic echoes caught in the blood of a nomadic tribe. And this isn't just scientific drift. It's what happens when a population splinters off early, before the great outpourings from the Near East, before farming reshaped genomes, before language families split the map. When a group moves, stays isolated, and survives long enough for its genetic signals to be buried beneath layers of time. This is deep ancestry, prehistoric, pre-linguistic, older than Proto-Afroasiatic, older than the Sahara's first dry season. It's why the Tuareg don't quite fit. Why is their genome a mosaic of known and unknowable pieces? Why do they hold maternal lineages that whisper of Europe, paternal markers that defy Arab expansion, and ghost signatures that hint at a forgotten people? Not extinct, but absorbed. That ancestor, that founder, may never have had a name, may never have been written about, but she's still here. In the eyes of Tuareg women, in the way they pass down tents, poetry, power. We often say we know where we come from. That ancestry is a map, a chart, a sequence, but the Tuareg remind us some of the most important stories haven't been told yet, and if they've been hiding this truth in the desert, what other secrets are buried beneath our feet? If you're fascinated by lost histories and ancient DNA mysteries, subscribe for more untold stories. In the next episode, we travel deeper into the Green Sahara to uncover a civilization lost not just to time, but to memory.